Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Reid. I'm a member of the Varsity Teacher Ambassadors and a Global Teacher Prize finalist from 2015. I come here from Vancouver, Canada, and I'm thrilled to be here today to introduce you to and for all of us to hear from John May, who's the Secretary General of the Duke of Edinburgh's International Award. Welcome, John.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Just a little introduction to my guest and friend here. John is a campaigner, a storyteller, a teacher, a youth worker, an independent diplomat, a writer, a broadcaster, an urban cyclist, occasional long-distance runner, habitual chocolate cake eater, my friend.
You're welcome.
And mischief maker, my friend, who has spent his career working with and for young people in the United Kingdom and around the world. So, tell us the most important thing about your experience as a Gold Award recipient of the award.
Oh gosh, it's more than 40 years since I did my Duke of Edinburgh's award. So I'm not sure that I can necessarily reflect on that terribly well. But I guess what the award did was it allowed me to understand that not all learning goes on in the classroom. I was a pretty middle of the range student. I was the sort of student, for those of us who have become teachers, I was the student who's at risk of being forgotten. I was neither particularly bright nor particularly disruptive, and I could have just been forgotten in the classroom. But a teacher came to me and said, why don't you try this thing called the Duke of Edinburgh's Award? And the award is a really simple collection of things and opportunities that a young person can use to create experiences for themselves that help them to grow outside the classroom between the ages of 14 and 24 years old. And as a 14-year-old boy growing up in the UK, I had the opportunity for the very first time to give service to the community and to develop a new skill and to do some sport and learn a little bit about leadership as well through adventurous activity. And as a result of all of that, I guess I learned more about myself and what it is I was wanting to be when I grew up.
It's interesting to me to hear you talk about the connection between what you took from your school context, you took from your outside of school context, this balance of formal and informal education. In terms of the components of the award, where would students be going or youth be going to gather these experiences?
I guess the truth of the matter is that different sorts of young people go to different places. The idea of the award is about celebrating young people's achievements outside the classroom. And it's about giving them a balanced diet of experiences that help them to develop the skills and behaviors and attitudes that are needed to be successful adults. We talk about equipping young people for life. And I think what's special about this simple framework is that every young person chooses their own individual path. So for me, I chose to do some running, although you'd never believe it now. I chose to learn about videography as a skill. I helped in an old people's home and went to visit elderly people and became their surrogate child one day a week. And we did some leadership through adventure. Now, that was my pathway. And over the last 60 years, millions and millions of young people in more than 130 countries around the world have chosen their individual pathways as well. And they've started off at 14, normally, doing 6 months of commitment and talking with an adult mentor, their leader, often a teacher or a youth worker, about what it is they'd like to do and setting their targets. And 6 months of experience has earned them a bronze award. And then they work through silver, which takes roughly a year. And then eventually they get to gold and they've done 18 months of commitment in all 4 of those critical areas. And in doing so, I think that they have probably developed skills of resilience and communication skills, and they've grown in confidence, and they've learned to navigate adolescence. And
that's a pretty critical, as a
I
high
reckon-
school teacher, that's a wonderful thing to help students
I
to do.
reckon that's what it's really about.
And when it comes to the Gold Award, and I should disclose that the school that I taught at for 9 years in Vancouver was home to a very big award program and a large contingent of students at the school who were completing the award, which included a number of students going out to complete some of the more demanding or challenging elements of the Gold Award. I was fortunate enough to join a group of students on the expedition portion to go out into Garibaldi Park, which is a beautiful, beautiful part of British Columbia. And I can tell you that when I showed up on Monday morning before the sun was up with a group of about 30 students to go on this adventure, they definitely gave me a look, that look of concern, like they might be carrying me out of the woods rather than me leaving on my own. I actually succeeded with getting through that whole time and all the hiking with not a single blister, which I think is worthwhile.
I think that's really impressive, Mark. Did you wear those shoes?
Not these ones,
Okay,
no.
just
But I did have brand new hiking boots, which is like rule number 1. You don't, yes. And I didn't need moleskin to fully protect. I did all right. But when it comes to the Gold Award, and especially those very demanding components, what's the diversity of experiences that students typically have or youth are having? Is it sort of one typical design, or are you seeing a lot of different ways that students are completing?
At the moment, there are 1.3 million young people around the world doing their award. And there are 1.3 million different programs, because every single young person charts a different track. And what I think is astonishing about this thing, and I've been involved in non-formal education for more than 30 years as an educator, I think what sets the award apart from everything else that I've seen is that the framework remains exactly the same whatever community or culture you're in. But how that framework is then transformed into experience for a young person differs from person to person. You're a musician, and I have met more young people than I care to imagine who have chosen for their skill to learn to play the trombone than I can. I don't really want to meet any more trombone players ever again.
They are lovely people, for the record.
There goes one. And those young people might be in rural Uganda, or they might be in downtown Vancouver, or they might be here in Dubai. Or they may choose a skill that is very community specific. So if I mention Uganda for a moment, met a lot of young people who have chosen for their skill to do brickmaking and beekeeping, because both of those will provide them with an income when they leave school. And that kind of choosing what's right for you and negotiating that with a teacher or an adult who is working with you, I think is a critical part of navigating.
It sounds to me then that a critical piece of the program is that it's inspiring students or youth to examine what options exist in front of them, rather than prescribing ways that they would complete the program.
Totally. And the award happens in so many different sorts of communities. In some parts of the world, people imagine that the award is only undertaken by young men and young women in smart schools. And the truth of the matter is that couldn't be further from the truth. The award is available to young people wherever young people might gather. We're in some of the most challenged communities in the world. We're in the favelas of Brazil. We're in the slums of Nairobi, and we're also in some of the most prestigious schools in Nairobi and in Brazil. And we're in prisons. I was in Cape Town relatively recently, and I went to visit a group of lads, boys, who were doing their Bronze Award in prison. It's an amazing thing to see something so simple genuinely changing young people's lives. And we went round the circle, and we were exploring what skill they'd chosen to do. And it was fascinating. There was bakery, there was motorcycle maintenance, there was building with bricks, construction. And we went round, and I thought, this is terrific. This is turning into a speech for the Secretary General to make, because each of these is a vocational skill, and when the young person leaves prison, they'll have a skill that they'll be able to take and they'll be able to use, and this is tremendous. And that's true. And then we got to Joseph, as I discovered his name to be. And there was a lot of nudging amongst his friends in the circle. And I said, so what did you do for your skill? And he went, I'll show you, sir. And he stood up, and in a perfect Italian accent, in a beautiful tenor voice, sang Nessun Dorma. And it made me realize that we should never assume anything of a young person. The skill of the prison officer who was working with him as a mentor had been to find Joseph's passion. And that's an overused word, I think, but in this case, it's absolutely appropriate. He had got into Joseph's soul and had literally given him a voice.
Wow. It's very interesting to know that there's, absolutely, a round of applause I think is worthwhile. It's interesting to me that there are many different contexts in which youth can engage with the program, and that there are leaders in various places that are engaging with the program.
Yeah.
If there was a key message, yourself being a change maker, in trying to inspire leaders of those programs around the world, what is a key principle or a key message that you'd like each one of those leaders to hear in thinking about how to inspire change then with youth?
Listen to young people. And that sounds rather trite, but as teachers, we spend, I don't know, when I was trained as a teacher, quite a lot of time was spent helping me to understand the importance of learning outcomes and objectives. And by the time I left Teacher Training College, I could write a SMART objective in my sleep. And I had a curriculum that I had to work through with the young people with whom I was working as a teacher. Non-formal education asks you to flip that. And of course you still have learning intentions in mind. That prison officer wanted to build the confidence of Joseph. He wanted him to have something that would make him feel proud and maybe help him with his communication skills. But he listened hard to work out what it was that would belong to Joseph that would make the experience right for him. And I think as teachers and educators, particularly working outside the classroom, we have to be brave enough not to impose our own expectations and our own preconceptions on young people, but instead to allow their aspirations, their dreams, their excitements to flow through. And when that happens, something, well, I mean, you've worked with orchestras and you've helped engage young people in some of the most disadvantaged schools in your communities. You know that when you find that something, that piece of stardust, when you're working with particularly with a teenager, it's magical.
Thank you for saying that. That's one of the joys of teaching music. That not only are we telling students in the room to constantly listen, we as teachers, we have to constantly listen. And it's a very different experience when the top priority in the room is to listen to others.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it as you talk about your entry into formal education. When you made the move to an informal or non-formal context, what was the moment that made you realize, like, this is right? I am certain that I'm going in the right direction.
Oh gosh, I'm lucky because I never really did one and not the other, and I have the Duke of Edinburgh's award to blame for that. So I did my Gold Award at university, and as part of my service, I was searching for something to do, and somebody suggested that I should go and work with Cub Scouts. And so I became a Cub Scout leader. And I've stayed involved with the Scout movement on and off, mainly on, ever since. And that's great non-formal community education when it's really good, and it so often is. So as a teacher, I was volunteering at the same time with youth in a different context. And I think the two really helped to feed each other in terms of the way in which I perceived my own practice as an educator to be developing. Neither one was more important than the other. I think they genuinely informed each other and made me a better educator as a result.
That's interesting. I found as students would bring me their books, and the way that this has happened for years is that there was a book, and they would write and track the various activities that they were completing, and it would come to me as their music teacher to sign off most often on a skill, sometimes on volunteer work. And I loved reading through the book, not just signing the one page, but looking through the book to see everything that was there, to really get to know some whole perspective and understand a little bit about how that child is developing and how they're thinking or seeing opportunities for themselves in their context.
Well, we've gone one stage further now because we now have that on an app. So a young person can capture what they're doing from the age of 14 to 25 and keep it digitally as a record of what they're doing, which is great because whilst it's not perhaps as tactile as a book, the cloud doesn't get lost in the washing machine. So they keep their records.
I've seen those books.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And they're able to hold on to all those memories. And scrolling through those experiences with young people is it's a real privilege to see.
Well, it adds an element that I hope is available in that as they're entering this information digitally, is there a way that different trends could be tracked or a way that we can understand how they're shifting? We're
beginning to. So I said, we're in 130 countries, 1.3 million young people at any one time, and that number's rising every year, doing their award. And we're beginning to be able to track the activities that young people are doing and the impact that they're having in their communities. We've worked with PricewaterhouseCoopers. They're called PwC now, aren't they? Branding is a very important thing. But we've worked with them and with a number of universities around the world to create and to develop a theory of change that starts, of course, with the outcomes for young people, but then tracks through all the way to community impact. And as a result, we're in a position nearly where we can begin reporting up to the UN on the impact that young people are having, for instance, on the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm really, really excited by that because for each young person choosing to volunteer in their communities, they have found a problem to solve that is about their own experience and their own needs. But aggregate those hundreds of thousands of hours of volunteering and you start to make a global impact. I know that through their engagement with the award, young people around the world are having a major impact now on the plastics agenda. I know that the environment is improving because of individual young people choosing in their communities to rid their communities of plastic. Wow. Now, I cannot think of something more cool than the idea that no government has told those young people to do that. No government is imposing a solution. Those young people are change makers in their own individual communities, and yet are part of, maybe even without knowing it, a global movement.
Well, it's something that strikes me that there's a common element between then the framework for the award and the framework for the SDGs, in that they're left for people to pick up and find their own path with, find ways that they want to interact with either the award program or with the SDGs. I myself am a Teach SDGs ambassador and look for ways, in my case, in arts education or music education, for students and teachers, colleagues, schools everywhere, to bring some of those messages into a context that I think many of my music colleagues wouldn't naturally think. They hear the word sustainability, they think social studies, or they think science, but they wouldn't necessarily think the context of arts education.
Yeah.
So I find that a very interesting flexibility and invitation element to each. So what kind of, are there some examples you could offer in ways that that youth are going out and reshaping their communities in other ways, especially in parts of the world where there's crisis looming in how social structures or environmental issues around them are at risk?
Well, do you know, wherever young people are volunteering, they're building sustainable and strong communities. And one needs to be really careful not to make claims that you can't substantiate. But I think, and this is going to sound very naive, but I'm going to stick with it, because ultimately I believe in the goodness of humanity and particularly the potential for young people. I believe that when young people come together and take action, and they're driven by a strong commitment and a strong belief, that does more than anything to combat violent extremism, prejudice, and whatever other words I might choose to use this afternoon. And I see that happening all the time. The award has pulled former child soldiers and helped them to rediscover their childhood and make new connections with communities that had shunned them. The award has worked with young people who have been shunned by society because their parents have died from HIV or AIDS-related illness. And those young people have discovered that they have worth and that they can contribute. There are young people, for instance, in India, who I met a group of boys from a school for blind young men. And I was talking about their engagement, and they had been providing their volunteering and their service by going out into the community, doing some litter picking. Some others had been working with little children, a whole range of different things. And one young man said to me as we were talking after he'd received his award, for the whole of my life, I have been a charity case myself. I have been a beneficiary of other people's philanthropy. And people look and they don't see me as an individual, but they see a blind person who needs help. For the first time in my life, I am helping other people on my terms. That's a powerful, powerful piece of empowerment of young people. And that's a stark example, but that's happening in community after community after community around the world, simply through non-formal education.
So we'll have an opportunity in just a moment for anyone here to ask a question, and we certainly will welcome them. given that this conversation is about change makers, and that you certainly absolutely are one, I'd like you to think back to younger days when there's probably someone in your life who turned you on to this program, or who was perhaps initially gave you that confidence that this is the kind of thing to go and pursue. Can you tell us maybe, ideally, who that person is, or what the context was of that moment when you found this award program and this opportunity?
Oh, well, I mean, as I said to you, there's this 14-year-old boy sitting in the middle of the classroom, not quite sure what he's going to do. And Ted Reeves, who was my maths teacher and also my scout leader, because I went to a boarding school that had a scout troop or a cadet corps, and you could choose one or the other, and I was a peacenik, so I joined the Scouts. Ted said to me, why don't you do this thing called the Duke of Edinburgh's Award? And he did so, quietly, and it was a gentle invitation, and I discovered something that I didn't realize, of course, at 14 years old was going to have a major effect on the whole of my life. Yeah. And what was special about him? Oh, he was an amazing teacher. And we all know those amazing teachers. They're the people who don't impose themselves on young people. They don't frighten them. Instead, they draw out the best. They answer questions. They ask the right questions at the right time. And they make a nervous, slightly geeky 14-year-old boy feel that he has control of his own destiny.
Well, it certainly sounds like it's a program that's available for everybody. And when you describe yourself as that type of youth, having the dual connection of with Mr. Reeves in the school and then outside the classroom, that seems like obviously a role model impact on you that has drawn you to a similar sort of dual engagement.
Yeah, I guess so. But I'm not alone. There are hundreds of thousands of adults around the world who have chosen to commit some of their time, either voluntarily or as part of their work, to supporting young men and young women in changing their lives. And those role models in and out of the classroom, I think, genuinely have a major effect on the way in which young people see themselves. I had the opportunity last week to be a little further south than here in Nairobi in Kenya, and I saw the most charismatic, wonderful teachers having an effect on young men and young women and what they want to do. Esther was just one of those teachers having an effect on her students that utterly empowered them and made them realize that they could be leaders of their country in the future. You can't ask for more than that from a teacher.
Absolutely. Could I welcome a question from someone? Yes, I think there's a microphone that'll make its way over to you there.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Hi, John. Thanks. Oh, a bit loud. Thank you so much for the session. Mine's been really just a comment from my side. So I grew up when I was 12 in the UK, and I got bullied to the extent that I had to learn to walk again. So I spent 6 months in the hospital. And my out, I guess, was actually Young Enterprise. So, Youth International, whatever it's called. And for me, it's just the case study for my life. It's transformed it. I ended up going to Harvard, and now I'm on the kind of a board of directors at the age of 27 of one of the world's leading higher education kind of associate enterprises. And I think, I just wanted to resonate with exactly what you were saying. It really does empower people's lives and transform it. So thank you very much for what you do.
Well, I'm really chuffed to hear that. Of course, Young Enterprise Junior Achievement is an amazing organisation. And I was lucky enough to lead Young Enterprise in the UK for several years. So that was a real privilege. But there's another example, and you can choose so many, of organisations that take young people and just shift them outside their normal classroom experience and change that relationship between teacher, educator, and young person. And I think what we need to do with non-formal education is make sure that every young person has the opportunity to find something of that. It doesn't actually matter for me whether it's the Scouts or whether it's Young Enterprise or whether it's their netball team. What's important is that there's something that changes that relationship between adult and young person, and that intergenerational piece, I think, helps a young person to grow. I have a mantra, which is that not all learning goes on in the classroom, or if you like, what goes on in the classroom is only half the story. And I worry that truth too often belongs only to young people who have very specific experiences or have certain privileges. For me, the concept of a holistic education should be a right of every child. And the challenge for us is to make that available to you, to a young person in the slums of Nairobi, a young person growing up on a farm in Western Australia. How do we change the educational agenda so that we're not just talking about academic education, which of course is important, but that we look at non-formal education as well?
I find really interesting as well that for each young person that gets involved in the program, what I've observed is that in the days of carrying around the book, inevitably one other child would ask, "What's that?"
Oh yeah.
And that just creates a buzz. I mean, in our school at the time of about 1,650 students, through one sort of central program, school's Vancouver Technical School in Vancouver, British Columbia, and the Summit program was sort of home to the students completing the award. And over the years, the number of students who were outside of the Summit program grew and grew and grew, who were engaging in pursuing the award. And to me, that seems like a really key moment of when you're lifting up one student, they will inevitably grab hold and lift another with them.
Yeah, and I think what does set the award in a very special place is that it's not a club, and it's not a membership organization. It works through clubs and through membership organizations. So you could have used your Young Enterprise experience towards the skills part of the award. In some ways, we're like the Intel Inside. You know, we're a piece of software that anybody can use, and we really just do two things. We describe a framework for young people's achievement, and then we get out and celebrate it. And we're really, really excited by the fact that young people get the opportunity to get a certificate and accreditation for what they've done, and to get a little badge to wear as well on their lapel. And later this week, we'll be holding our very first Gold Award ceremony here in Dubai for young people in the UAE. And we're really, really excited about that, and I'm delighted that schools here seem to be excited about that too.
Well, I'm thrilled that many years ago, Mr. Reeves got you involved, because that clearly has taken you on a career path to do nothing more or do nothing less than grab hold of thousands of other young people around the world and show them these opportunities, and create a rather substantial and active network of people doing this work.
You're right.
So thank you so much for sharing so much about the award today and about yourself, and thank you all for joining us, and enjoy the assembly this evening.
Thanks very much.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you.